To create a second screen, which will contain our menu, we will in SpriteKit need to create a new scene. Just like in a normal app, we'd use another view controller. To do so, I will, in my folder Scenes, add a new file. It will be a Cocoa Touch class, and it will be a subclass of SKScene, and it will be called MenuScene. As soon as I've created the new file, I will have to change the import right at the top. Since unfortunately, Xcode will always import UIKit for us, which then results in an error since the type SKScene is undeclared. As soon as I change the import to SpriteKit though, our error disappears. Before we start implementing the class itself, I want to quickly go back into our game view controller file, where I want to now, if our app starts, show the menu scene instead of our game scene. I can do that by just exchanging the class in the line where I initialize the scene. The initializer will stay exactly the same, and so does everything else in the class. If we start the app now, we will see our menu scene. So now it's time to implement it together. Before we go back into the menu scene.swift file, I will select my asset catalog, where at the last graphic we need for our game. In your resources folder, you will find an image with the name logo at 2x, which I will now just drag into our asset catalog. This is just a simple logo image, which we can now use in our menu scene. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Since the content of this menu scene class will be similar to a lot of stuff we've already done together, I will only implement the basic structure of our class, so that you, if you like, can give this a shot and try it on your own. First, I will override our didMoveToView method, which again will be called as soon as our scene appears on the screen. Inside of the didMoveToView method, I want to set my background color property. And we can just copy this from our game scene so that we don't have to type all the values for the color again. I now want to add different visual elements to my scene. The first being our logo. And therefore I will create a new method called addLogo. Then I want to add some labels to my scene. So I will create a new method called addLabels. And I will then call both new methods from my didMoveToView method by calling addLogo and addLabels. Inside of the addLogo method, we want to create a new sprite node containing our logo image that should be positioned closely to the top. In the addLabels method, I want to add 3 labels, which I will quickly initialize for you. One will be a play label as an SKLabel node containing the text tap to play. One will be a high score label as an SKLabel node with the text high score. And finally, a recent score label, also as an SKLabel node with the text recent score. These labels should then be positioned right below each other on the menu screen. Now that this basic structure exists, why don't you try completing our menu class so that our logo and labels are properly shown. So why don't you pause the video for a moment and give it a go. We'll continue by doing it together. Starting in our addLogo method, I will define a new constant called logo, which I will initialize as an SKSprite node with an image named logo that we just added to our asset catalog. I now want to change the size of my logo by writing logo.size and setting it to a CG size instance. I now have to define a width and a height for my logo. And I want to set this depending on our screen size. For the width, I will set it to frame.width divided by 4. And for the height, I'll just do the same, since our logo is square. I can then set the logo's position by setting its position property to a CG point with the coordinates x as frame.midx to center it, and for y I will set frame.midy, to which I will add frame.size.height divided by 4 to position my logo slightly above the center of the y-axis. I will also add this .size property in the line above, where we sized our sprite node. I can then call the addChild method, just like we did for adding nodes in our game scene, to add the logo to our menu scene. That's all we need to do for our logo, so we can move on to our addLabels method. I will start with our play label, which we've already initialized by setting its font name property to Avenir Next Bold. So now I'll do play label.font size and set it to 50.0. Since it will contain slightly more text than our score label in the game scene, and that's why we want to make it slightly smaller. I can then set the font color to UI color.white, and I'm already able to set the position property to a CG point, since the play label should be in the center of our scene. So we'll just do frame.midx and frame.midy. I can then call addChild and play label to add the label to our scene. Now, since the other two labels are pretty similar, I can just copy this part here and then paste it for the other two labels, where we're just going to change some values. To start, we'll of course have to replace play label with the appropriate other labels. So in this case, high score label, and we also want to make the other two labels slightly smaller. So I will reduce the font size to 40.0. For the position of our high score label, the X value can stay as it is, but the Y value will be something else. I'll subtract high score label.frame.size.height times 4 from frame.midY to have a little space to our play label in the middle. For recent score, I will also begin by replacing the names. Reduce the font size to 40.0. And for its Y position, I will say high score label.position.y and then subtract recent score label.frame.size.height times 2 to position the recent score label slightly below the high score label. And that's basically all we need to do to add our logo and the three labels to our menu scene. However, we also want to be able to start a game by tapping on the screen, just like our tap to play label suggests. And therefore, I will also override the touches began method in my menu scene. As soon as I type in touches, I can select the touches began method and insert it into my scene. All we want to do here is initialize a game scene and then show it. I can do so by creating a constant called game scene, which I will initialize as a game scene instance with a size view.bounds.size. Pretty similar on how we did it for our game view controller, where we just presented the menu scene. We do have to add an exclamation mark here after view, but we're able to do so since our menu scene is currently presented in this view, and we can therefore be sure that it isn't nil. I can then write view.presentScene and pass our game scene instance to this method, which will bring us to the game scene. We've now pretty much completed the basic structure of our menu scene, so let's run the app again and take a look at what we've got. As the app starts, I can see that we are now in our menu and not in the game itself. Our logo is being shown and so are our labels. As soon as I tap on the screen, our game scene is shown and we can play the game just like we did before. The only problem is, as soon as we hit our game over state, we're still stuck in this game scene and we are not able to get back to the menu. We should also probably make sure that we're actually saving our scores in the game in a way that we can access them and show them to our users in the menu scene. And that's what we're going to look at next.